There is always a silence before something profound begins to take shape. This silence is not just the absence of sound, it is a field of stillness where the old dissolves and the potential for the new quietly gathers its strength. Transformation rarely begins in noise or chaos. Instead, it is born in the unseen, in the unspoken, in the quietness that many are too restless to embrace. To recognize this silence is to recognize the gateway to change. When a storm passes, there is a moment of calm, an atmosphere where the air feels heavy with clarity. In the same way, before transformation arrives in life, there is often a stillness that unsettles us. It feels empty, even uncomfortable, as if nothing is happening. But in reality, everything is happening. The silence before transformation is like the deep breath that nature takes before it exhales as a new season. We are accustomed to movement, to progress, to sound. Our days are filled with activity, with voices, with constant demands. To stop and enter silence seems unnatural, as if we are wasting time. Yet it is in this very silence that the roots of transformation are nurtured. It is in the pauses of life that we gain clarity, that we hear the whispers of wisdom that are otherwise drowned out by the noise of the world. The silence before transformation can often be mistaken for stagnation. Many people resist it, fearing that nothing is happening. But silence does not mean stillness of life, it means the gathering of energy. Just as a seed lies in the darkness of soil, moving on the surface but bursting with life beneath, transformation also begins unseen. The soil of silence is where the seeds of change are nourished. There is a discipline required to sit within this silence, to not force, to not demand, to not push forward simply because the world teaches us that action is everything. Sometimes the most powerful action is non-action. To sit quietly, to observe without interfering, to allow what is ready to come forward in its own time. The silence before transformation is not passive. It is active waiting, a waiting that sharpens awareness and deepens presence. Silence allows us to see more clearly the weight we have been carrying. When the noise fades, the burdens we cling to appear in sharper detail. We notice the attachments, the fears, the false identities we have worn for too long. In silence, we can no longer distract ourselves from what is heavy within us. We must face it. And in facing it, we allow space for it to dissolve. This is why silence often feels uncomfortable. It reveals the truth. But the truth is the foundation of transformation. Before the caterpillar becomes the butterfly, it enters stillness. Cocooned in darkness, no noise, no movement, only transformation happening silently within. We do not see the struggle of its reshaping. We only see the emergence of beauty when the time is right. The same is true for us. The silence before transformation is the cocoon, the sacred place where we shed the old form and prepare to step into the new. This silence is not only external but also internal. It is the quieting of the mind, the slowing of restless thoughts, the calming of endless desires. The inner silence is what allows us to listen to the deeper currents of life. It is what connects us to something greater than ourselves, something timeless and steady. The silence before transformation is a doorway, and when entered, it connects us with the universal rhythm of change. Many fear silence because it confronts them with emptiness. But this emptiness is not lack, it is space. Space for something new to arise. Space for old wounds to heal. Space for clarity to emerge. Transformation cannot occur when the space is filled with noise, distractions, and clutter. It requires the openness that silence creates. In silence, we begin to realize that transformation is less about becoming something else and more about uncovering what has always been within. The noise of the world covers the truth of who we are, but in silence the coverings fall away. Transformation then is not about adding, but about removing. Not about becoming, but about remembering. The silence before transformation humbles us. It teaches patience. It shows us that the most powerful changes cannot be rushed or forced. They happen in their own rhythm, in their own time. Just as no one can rush the sunrise, no one can rush the unfolding of transformation. All that can be done is to remain present, to remain open, and to allow silence to do its work. It is in this silence that energy gathers, like water building behind a dam, waiting for the right moment to flow forward with force. The energy of transformation builds quietly within. The silence is the preparation, the invisible work that ensures when transformation arrives, it is complete and unstoppable. The silence before transformation is a teacher. It teaches us trust in the unseen processes of life. Trust that even when nothing seems to be happening, The universe is moving in ways we cannot yet perceive. Trust that the stillness we fear is actually the beginning of our becoming. The silence before transformation requires courage. To sit in silence means to confront ourselves, to confront what we avoid, to meet what we hide from, to listen to what we suppress. But only in facing these truths can we be free of them, and only in freedom can true transformation take place. The silence is not empty. It is full of potential, full of wisdom, full of life waiting to emerge. To honor this silence is to honor the process of transformation itself. To sit in this silence is to align with the rhythm of existence. And to allow this silence is to allow transformation to move through us in its most authentic form. Life continuously places us in circumstances that test our understanding of who we are, what we value, and what we are willing to hold on to. At the center of this examination lies what can be called the test of attachments. Attachments are not merely the physical possessions we cling to, but also the ideas, identities, relationships, and emotions that we allow to define us. These bonds are not inherently negative, yet the weight of them often determines whether we walk freely or whether we remain chained. The test is not about avoiding attachments entirely, but about discovering the nature of our relationship with them and realizing how they shape our freedom and our growth. When one begins to examine attachments closely, it becomes clear that they often arise from a deep longing for security and permanence. The human mind searches for something steady in a world that is constantly changing. We attach to material belongings because they give us a sense of stability. We attach to certain roles, such as being a parent, a partner, or a professional, because they give us an identity that feels fixed in the flux of life. We attach to ideas and beliefs because they provide certainty in a world of uncertainty. Yet what is steady in life? What is permanent? The truth is that everything changes, and when what we cling to begins to shift or slip away, the suffering emerges. The test of attachments is therefore a test of how gracefully we can meet change and how deeply we can understand impermanence. One of the clearest examples of attachment is the way the mind clings to the past. Memories become like sacred treasures that we polish and revisit, sometimes to the point of living in them rather than in the present. But when the past is no longer here, to remain attached to it is to carry a weight that prevents forward movement. The same applies to the future. The attachment to imagined outcomes or expectations binds us to scenarios that may never unfold. We suffer not because of what is happening, but because of what we are unwilling to release. The test reveals itself every time we are asked to let go of what no longer serves us and to trust the unfolding of what is yet to come. Relationships too, while beautiful, can turn into arenas of attachment. To love deeply is not the same as to cling. Clinging demands control, possession, and certainty, while love flows with freedom, trust, and openness. When attachment disguises itself as love, it often brings fear. The fear of loss, the fear of being alone, the fear of change. The test of attachments in relationships asks whether we are willing to allow another being to be free while we remain whole in ourselves. It asks whether we can give without demanding, whether we can care without controlling, and whether we can stand in companionship without making the other the foundation of our existence. Attachments also appear in the realm of identity. A person may say, "I am this kind of person, I believe in this, I do not do that." While having a sense of self can provide direction, the danger arises when the self becomes rigid. If life offers an opportunity to grow beyond those boundaries, the attachment to identity resists, creating inner conflict. The test here is whether one can remain flexible, allowing identity to be a tool rather than a prison. Just as water takes the shape of its container yet never loses its essence, so too the self must be adaptable without being lost. Even on the spiritual path, attachments can emerge in subtle forms. The attachment to progress, to achievements in meditation, or to experiences of peace can all become obstacles. To cling even to enlightenment as a goal is still a form of holding on. The test in this dimension is whether one can practice without seeking, act without grasping, and experience without possessing. True freedom comes not when one gains more, but when one is no longer bound by the desire to gain. At its core, the test of attachments is a mirror reflecting our fears and insecurities. We hold tightly because we are afraid of emptiness. We cling because we fear that without these attachments, we will be nothing. Yet the paradox is that it is precisely in letting go that we discover a deeper fullness. When attachments fall away, what remains is not emptiness but spaciousness. What remains is the capacity to live without fear of loss, to give without fear of depletion, and to be without the constant need to define oneself. This test is not one that comes once in life and then disappears. It arises repeatedly, in small ways and in profound ways. The breaking of a cherished object, the ending of a relationship, the shifting of circumstances. All are moments when attachments are exposed. Some may resist the lesson and cling even tighter, while others may begin to see that letting go is not destruction but liberation. Each time the test arrives, it is an invitation to examine where we are holding on and whether that holding on serves us or keeps us bound. Attachments are not dissolved by force but by understanding. To see clearly that everything is impermanent is to recognize that clinging is futile. To observe the nature of the mind and its cravings is to step into awareness. Slowly, the grip loosens not because we force ourselves to let go, but because we see that holding on no longer makes sense. The test of attachments, therefore, is not one to be passed with effort alone, but with wisdom, patience, and clarity. There is a heaviness that arises when one is cut off from the currents of life, a kind of silent burden that presses not only on the body, but also on the soul. This weight of isolation is not always visible, nor does it announce itself loudly, but it lingers quietly like an anchor holding someone beneath the surface. To be isolated is not simply to be alone in a room or apart from others physically. It is a deeper condition where one feels disconnected, unseen, unheard, and separated from the very pulse of existence. This form of separation can be suffocating because human beings are not designed to thrive in disconnection. Just as the tree withers when its roots no longer touch fertile soil, the human spirit begins to wither when it is cut off from connection. Isolation carries with it a paradox. On the one hand, solitude has value. In solitude, the mind can become clear, the heart can find peace, and the individual can reconnect with what is essential. Yet isolation is solitude turned heavy. It is solitude without nourishment, a silence that grows dense and cold rather than light and liberating. Solitude is chosen, but isolation is imposed, sometimes by external circumstances, sometimes by the weight of one's own mind. In this distinction lies the heart of the matter. Solitude strengthens, but isolation weakens. The weight of isolation is felt in the body as fatigue, in the mind as fog, and in the heart as a lingering ache. One begins to lose the rhythm of human connection. The laughter of others feels distant, the warmth of a shared moment becomes a memory rather than a reality, and the simple act of being seen or acknowledged turns into a longing rather than a daily occurrence. In this state, time itself feels heavier. Hours stretch longer, nights become thicker, and mornings arrive without brightness. The ordinary flow of life slows down until each step feels like carrying a hidden burden that few others can perceive. Isolation also shapes the mind in subtle ways. When one is disconnected, thoughts tend to loop inward. The world outside becomes smaller, while the internal landscape becomes vast and consuming. What may have been small concerns expand into great worries. What may have been momentary doubts grow into long-lasting fears. The absence of others' voices allows the echoes of one's own mind to grow louder, sometimes distorting reality. Without external mirrors, without shared perspectives, the mind can easily lose balance. This is why prolonged isolation does not only create sadness but can also breed confusion, suspicion, or despair. Yet, the weight of isolation is not only a personal matter. It also reveals something about the nature of being human. To exist is to be in relationship, not only with people, but with nature, with time, with space, with breath. A bird does not fly alone in the sky without feeling the currents of air, just as a river cannot flow without touching the banks. Existence itself is relational, and when one is cut off from these connections, life loses its natural rhythm. The burden then is not simply that one is without others, but that one is without harmony. Consider the way silence feels different depending on the context. In meditation, silence is powerful, expansive, and supportive. But in isolation, silence can become oppressive, like walls closing in. The difference is not in the silence itself, but in the quality of presence. Silence in connection has depth, while silence in isolation has weight. This weight presses down, reducing energy, narrowing vision, making each moment feel denser than it truly is. Isolation also teaches us about the fragility of the human spirit. Even the strongest individuals, when cut off for too long, begin to bend under its weight. What keeps people standing is not only inner strength, but also the invisible threads of connection. Threads woven through words, gestures, shared breaths, even fleeting glances. When those threads are absent, the spirit feels untethered, as though floating in a void without anchors. The absence of contact becomes more than physical, it becomes existential. The weight of isolation can also manifest as a dullness of the senses. Food loses its flavor, colors seem muted, music carries less emotion. Without the presence of others to reflect, share, and amplify, the richness of experience begins to fade. A beautiful sunset loses some of its brilliance if there is no one to point to it, no one to share in its wonder. Human beings are not passive observers of life, they are participants, and participation requires connection. When participation is removed, even beauty becomes heavy, even joy becomes subdued. At its deepest level, the weight of isolation forces a confrontation with self. With no distractions, no external affirmations, no roles to play. One is left face to face with the raw essence of being. For some, this can be liberating, a chance to strip away illusions. But for others, it is suffocating, a confrontation with fears, regrets, and inner voices that are hard to quiet. This is why isolation is such a complex experience. It can either break someone down or strip them open for transformation. Still, even in its heaviness, isolation reveals truth. It shows how deeply intertwined life is, how essential connection is to the health of the mind and heart. It unmasks the illusion of complete independence and shows that strength is not the absence of others, but the ability to live in harmony with them. It also reminds us that the burden of isolation is not always visible, and that behind the smiles or silences of others, this unseen weight may be quietly carried. Struggle is not something that comes from outside alone. It is not simply the difficulties of the world pressing against us. It is the reflection of the battle happening inside. The mirror of struggle shows us more than circumstances. It reveals the hidden corners of our own being. When challenges rise and life confronts us, it is as though a mirror is held up in front of us. What we see in that reflection is not just the situation, but the way we meet it, the posture of the mind, the resilience of the heart, the stability of the body. Struggle is both a teacher and a mirror, exposing the places where we are still unsettled, uncertain, or untrained. Every human being carries within themselves a mixture of clarity and confusion. When life is easy, the confusion can hide behind comfort. But when struggle arrives, the confusion surfaces. It is like mud stirred at the bottom of a pond. Suddenly the water becomes cloudy, and we cannot see clearly. Yet the cloudiness was always there, only hidden. Struggle does not invent weakness, it exposes weakness. It does not create fear, it unmasks fear. This is why struggle is one of the most honest mirrors we can ever face, because it shows us without distortion who we are in the moments when everything is uncertain. Many try to run from struggle as if avoiding it will make it disappear, but the mirror cannot be escaped. Wherever you go, you carry it. The struggle is not only in the external circumstances, but in the way you respond to them. If the mind is weak, even a small challenge will seem overwhelming. If the mind is trained, even the greatest storm can be faced with calmness. The mirror of struggle, therefore, is not a punishment, but an opportunity. It is an invitation to see yourself truthfully and to recognize the areas where growth must happen. The Shaolin tradition teaches that the body is tested so that the mind can awaken. Physical strain is not only about endurance, it is about revealing how the mind reacts under pressure. In the same way, life brings struggle not merely to challenge us, but to show us the raw material of our being. When fatigue sets in, does the mind give up quickly or does it endure? When confronted with uncertainty, does fear paralyze or does curiosity awaken? Each answer is a reflection, each reaction a glimpse into the mirror. Struggle refines the human spirit in ways that comfort never can. Comfort teaches us to rest, but struggle teaches us to rise. In the heat of difficulty, the ego begins to crack, and what lies beneath becomes visible. Pride may dissolve, arrogance may be humbled, and false certainty may be broken. What remains is more authentic, more direct, closer to the truth. This is why those who walk through struggle often carry a presence that feels deeper, heavier, grounded in experience. The mirror they faced was harsh, but it polished them into something unshakable. It is important to understand that struggle itself does not transform you. It is your attitude towards it that determines the outcome. The same weight can crush one person and strengthen another. The same storm can cause one to collapse and another to stand taller. What makes the difference is not the struggle itself, but the inner posture. If the mind resists and complains, the mirror will only reflect frustration. If the mind accepts and learns, the mirror will reveal growth. The external event is neutral, the inner response gives it meaning. When you begin to recognize the mirror of struggle, you also begin to see patterns. You notice that the same type of difficulties repeat themselves, appearing in different forms but carrying the same lesson. This is life's way of reminding you that something inside still requires attention. Until the lesson is learned, the mirror will continue to show it. This is why people often find themselves in cycles of repeated struggle. It is not because life is cruel, but because life insists that we see ourselves clearly. Silence in the face of struggle is not weakness. It is strength. To remain still when the mirror shows something uncomfortable requires courage. To resist the urge to run or escape requires maturity. In that silence, awareness grows. The mind begins to separate the situation from the reaction, and clarity arises. You start to see that the struggle itself is not the enemy, but the doorway to a deeper understanding of yourself. The mirror of struggle does not flatter. It does not lie. It will not show you what you wish to see, but what you need to see. And in this sense, it is one of the most reliable teachers. To bow before it, to observe it without fear, is to learn the art of humility. Through this humility, discipline is born. Through discipline, strength develops. Through strength, clarity shines. What is reflected in the mirror of struggle is the truth of your present state. It may not be the truth you desire, but it is the truth you must work with. And only when you acknowledge that truth can transformation begin. The mirror does not offer shortcuts, it does not offer illusions. It only offers the reality of where you stand, and in that reality lies the seed of change. Struggle will always come, in small ways and great. It will appear in relationships, in health, in work, in the quiet corners of the mind. Each time it arrives, the mirror is lifted once again. Each time you are given the chance to look more deeply, to refine yourself more fully, to see beyond the surface and into the essence. Struggle is therefore not the enemy, but the reflection of what has not yet been integrated within yourself. To embrace that mirror is to embrace your own becoming. There comes a moment in life when the noise of the world begins to clash too heavily with the rhythm inside. That dissonance feels like carrying two melodies at once, each pulling in a different direction, leaving the mind unsettled and the body restless. This is the silent call for alignment, the reminder that harmony must first be found within before it can be reflected in the outer world. When thoughts move one way, actions another, and emotions yet another, the energy becomes fragmented. And fragmented energy, no matter how strong, cannot sustain its force. It leaks, it dissipates, and it leaves one feeling drained rather than empowered. Alignment is not about perfection. It is not about living a life free of mistakes or chaos. It is about tuning all aspects of oneself, thoughts, feelings, actions, and intentions, so they are not working against each other, but instead flowing in the same direction. Imagine the bow across the strings of an instrument. If the strings are tightened unevenly, the sound produced will be sharp and unpleasant. But when tuned properly, even a single stroke can produce resonance that vibrates deeply. Human life is the same. The call for alignment is the invitation to tune the instrument of being. So much of suffering comes from misalignment. A person says one thing but feels another. They dream of freedom yet chain themselves with habits that contradict that dream. They seek peace while clinging to turmoil. The more these contradictions grow, the heavier life feels. The body resists, the mind resists, even the spirit becomes tired. This is why alignment is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Without it, even the most sincere effort produces only a fraction of its potential. But when alignment exists, small actions carry the weight of mountains. To answer the call for alignment is to first recognize where disharmony lies. Many people try to run faster, work harder, or add more noise to their lives to avoid hearing it. But silence makes it evident. In stillness, the misaligned currents inside are felt. A quiet mind reveals where the words spoken do not match the heart's truth. It shows where habits do not serve the purpose one claims to desire. It exposes the friction that keeps energy trapped instead of flowing freely. This awareness is uncomfortable, but it is the doorway. Alignment cannot happen without the courage to see misalignment. Once seen, the process of adjustment begins. This is not about dramatic external change at first. It is about subtle inner redirection. If one notices anger where they seek compassion, the work is not to force compassion instantly, but to understand the root of anger. If one notices fear where they desire courage, the work is not to pretend fear does not exist, but to face it gently until it loosens its grip. Alignment is the art of small, continuous shifts that gradually bring all layers of being closer together. There is power in aligned intention. A thought aligned with a feeling, aligned with a word, aligned with an action. This creates momentum that nothing external can resist. It is like the flow of water finding its path down the mountain. At first, it may seem weak compared to the rock, but over time, its persistence carves valleys and shapes landscapes. Misaligned energy disperses like scattered rain. Aligned energy cuts like a river. When the call for alignment is answered, clarity emerges. Decisions no longer require endless debate because the mind and heart are no longer opponents. Action flows naturally because it is not being sabotaged by conflicting desires. Even challenges are met differently. Instead of creating resistance, they become opportunities to strengthen alignment further. Every obstacle reveals where one is still divided within. This state does not remove difficulties from life, but it changes the way they are carried. A misaligned person will bend under pressure because their inner foundation is unstable. But an aligned person, even under the same weight, stands straighter. Their energy is not wasted in inner conflict, it is directed toward what truly matters. Alignment also deepens connection with the world outside. Relationships transform because they are no longer built on pretenses but on genuine resonance. Work becomes more meaningful because it reflects inner values rather than external demands. Even health improves, for the body thrives when mind and spirit are not in contradiction. The human being is not meant to be fragmented. Wholeness is the natural state. The call for alignment is constant, though often ignored. It speaks in exhaustion when one is living against their truth. It whispers in dissatisfaction when success feels empty. It vibrates in restlessness when routines do not serve growth. To ignore it is to prolong imbalance, but to listen is to begin returning to harmony. The process may be gradual, but every step toward alignment is a step toward strength. In this way, alignment is not simply a concept but a practice. It is revisited daily, refined continually, and strengthened through awareness. It asks for honesty, patience, and persistence. It is the quiet discipline of bringing thought, word, and deed into one current, so the life force is no longer divided but whole. And when that wholeness begins to shine through, the individual no longer feels like they are fighting against life. They feel carried by it, as if the very current of existence is flowing through them without resistance. Humility is not weakness, nor is it a lowering of oneself into invisibility. It is a threshold, a silent doorway that leads from the restless striving of the ego into the boundless clarity of the self. When one begins to approach humility, it feels at first like a stripping away. The desire to prove, the hunger to control, the compulsion to always be right, these slowly loosen their grip. Humility asks us to step into a different rhythm, one where listening becomes more valuable than speaking, and where presence outweighs performance. At the threshold of humility, a person starts to notice how much energy has been invested in appearances. To look strong, to appear intelligent, to be recognized as successful. These have shaped the actions of countless lives. Yet humility teaches that recognition is not the true reward. The essence of life is not measured by applause or comparison, but by alignment with something greater than the small self. Crossing this threshold means realizing that the desire to dominate or to stand above others is an illusion. The real strength lies in being able to stand among others without the need to diminish or exalt. Humility allows space for learning. When the mind is filled with certainty, no room remains for growth. But when a person admits not knowing, the path opens wide for discovery. The student who bows before the master does not lose dignity in that bow. Instead, the bow itself creates the condition through which wisdom can flow. The act of humbling oneself clears away the arrogance that blocks understanding. In this way, humility is not an act of lowering but an act of clearing. It is like sweeping dust from the mirror so that the reflection becomes clear again. Humility also transforms relationships. Where pride builds walls, humility creates bridges. In pride, one sees only separation, my success versus yours, my truth against your truth. In humility, one begins to see connection. Your success does not diminish me, and your truth expands my own. The threshold of humility invites us to dissolve the boundaries that ego insists upon. It calls us to recognize the interdependence of all things. Just as a single tree in the forest cannot exist without soil, water, sunlight, and countless unseen forces, so too no life stands apart. Humility teaches this interconnection not as a concept but as a lived reality. In the quiet of humility, comparison begins to fade. Comparison is one of the most subtle prisons the mind creates. It says, I am only worthy if I am greater than another, richer than another, stronger than another. But at the threshold of humility, such measurements lose their meaning. Worth is no longer tied to external scales, but is recognized as inherent. Every being has value, not because of what they achieve, but because they are a part of the unfolding whole. Humility clears away the noise of constant comparison, revealing a deeper peace that does not depend on winning or losing. Humility is also the soil in which true confidence grows. The ego confuses humility with weakness because it does not understand strength without show. But real confidence does not need to shout. A mountain does not declare its height, yet it towers above all. The ocean does not proclaim its depth, yet it holds within it immeasurable life. Likewise, a person rooted in humility no longer seeks to announce their worth. Their presence itself communicates strength, not because they demand recognition, but because their being radiates balance. At the threshold of humility, silence becomes a form of power. The need to justify, to argue, to prove, these all begin to dissolve. What remains is a quiet presence that does not bend to insult or flattery. This silence does not mean the absence of voice. It means the absence of unnecessary struggle. It is the stillness of one who knows they are aligned with something larger, and in that alignment there is no need to defend. To step into humility is to see clearly how fleeting control really is. We try to control outcomes, people, and even time itself. Yet humility whispers that control is a mirage. Life moves with or without our grasp. When one bows to this truth, a new kind of freedom opens. Instead of exhausting energy in holding on, energy flows into acceptance and adaptability. This is the freedom that arises not from conquest but from surrender, not from dominance but from trust. Humility also redefines success. Success, through the eyes of ego, is accumulation. More wealth, more recognition, more proof of worth. But success through humility is alignment, living in a way that does not betray the heart, moving in harmony with the greater flow of life. To reach this kind of success, one must cross the threshold where appearances lose importance and authenticity takes their place. Standing at the threshold of humility means standing at a place of transformation. One foot rests in the world of ego and striving, the other begins to step into the vast field of simplicity and truth. It is not an easy crossing, for the ego resists, clinging tightly to its old positions. Yet once the crossing is made, life takes on a different texture. What once felt heavy becomes light. What once was about self becomes about service. What once was bound in competition becomes free in connection.